Hi, I'm Peggy Winship. This is my friend Reggie, and we're here to answer some questions, I guess.
So I gave Miss Peggy the chapters to read about an hour before I got here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're winging it tonight. She has a general gist of what we're trying to do, but we are flying by the seat of our pants as Miss Peggy and I normally do. So I asked her to read Joshua 3 and 4, which is all about how God holds back the waters of the Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
And in those chapters, he asks each of the 12 tribes to carry a stone across and to build a monument. And so we are collecting those metaphorical stones and adding those stories to kind of like a catalog in our church so that we can build our own monument at Crossway. And so I want Miss Peggy to tell me, Miss Peggy, if you will tell me a story or sometime in your life that if you were to sit down with somebody in the church and say, here is a story that will build your faith of how God worked in my life. Not necessarily asking for your testimony. It can include that if it needs to. But just a time where God really worked in your life and you saw him hold back the waters metaphorically.
Okay. Well, let me just start out with the end. God broke my hip. We moved here in 2000, and I belonged to a different denomination all my life. My husband was not a churchgoer, and I was going to church with my sons, who were of a different denomination than I was, and I was very upset with them. I didn't like it. I didn't like the church, but I had to go because I didn't know how to drive to the Catholic Church. So I went, and I wouldn't talk, and I wouldn't sing, and I was really kind of a nasty person. Well, came time to move into the house, and it was going to be Thanksgiving, and I had an awful pain in my hip. Well, God broke my hip, and he did so because when I came home, all these women who I had not talked to and had not looked at brought me food. Now, how do you not like people that bring you food? And gradually, I started studying the Bible because I had nothing else to do because I couldn't go anywhere, and had never studied the Bible in my life. And all these little things started to click. Well, in the meantime, my husband started studying the Bible, and I thought for sure nothing was going to come of this. We were coming home from church one Wednesday night, and I said, you know why they want you to study the Bible? And he said, yeah. And I said, they want you to be baptized. And he said, yeah. And he was a very private person. And I said, are you going to do it? And he said, yeah. I said, are you really? He said, oh yeah. And I was at the point where I could do it too. The only thing we agreed on is we would do it together. And so on April 28th of 2001, Roger and I were both baptized. Our son at the time was the campus minister at the church we were going to, and my other son was there, so it was a real family affair. And that's my turning point, was God breaking my hip, and I'm convinced that he broke my hip just for that reason.
Just so some ladies would start bringing
me
you
food. And you really, they'd bring food and they'd talk to me and they were so nice, and I thought, I have been so rude to these people, and they still like me. So it was quite an experience. It was a real eye-opener.
Did you start studying the Bible on your own, or did you study with somebody?
I studied with Allison.
How did she convince you? Good job, Allison. How did she convince you to do it?
Well, it was the same thing. I couldn't go anywhere, so she'd come up and we'd just start reading the Bible, and I don't think anybody convinced me to do it. It was like a slow process. Mm-hmm. I think the biggie was my husband, because he truly had never, I've never known him to go to church. He would come with me on holidays or when there were big things for the kids, but never, ever, he took to this church, to the Bible, to the people 100% before I did.
That's so cool. And so he came with you like one of the first times you went to Crossway, or?
He actually, see, we started in Thomasville at
Okay, that's
Cornerstone.
right.
And then we came down here, and he was the one, I had to go with them. He wanted to go, but I, A, have no sense of direction, and B, didn't know anything about Tallahassee. So if I wanted to go to church at all, I had to go with them.
Yeah.
And you know, you hear little inklings, and you don't think they're meaning anything, but I also had a son that had converted.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I talked, he was here, I was in California. Every time I talked to him, he'd just get a little bit in about the Bible, or a little bit this, or a little bit of that. And, you know, after a while, it kind of works on you. But, and then both my boys were baptized. They both married disciples. So I was kind of a holdout.
This is a weird question, but has there ever been times where you thought, maybe not that you made the wrong decision, but that you questioned everything?
I didn't question everything. What I did was, excuse me, the church I went to had a lot of tradition and a lot of, what do I want to say? Ceremony, that's not the word.
Yeah.
A lot of things that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I kind of missed that. But that's not doctrinal. It has nothing to do with your salvation, or, you know, it's just, but no, I never really, everything that kind of came together made sense to me.
Yeah. So let's pretend that you're talking to somebody in the church, somebody younger, kind of like I shared some of my story with Peggy earlier, and the reason that I started all of this. And I said, you know, at one point I really didn't have anything that was monumental in my life that I felt like God had moved mountains, which is, you know, he's always working in our lives. And it's cool. I always kid in my ripe 31 years now to look back.
Let me tell you about ripe years here, honey.
I knew I'd get a chuckle out of that one. But it is cool. I mean, to look back and to see, even in the small things, where it was, maybe he wasn't holding back waters, but he was moving, and I can see that now. Mm-hmm. If you had somebody that was in the church that was younger that came to you, and they said, Miss Peggy, how do you know that God is faithful? That's a big question. But, like, would you have any advice, any wisdom for them?
Probably.
It's a tough one. Take your time.
That is a tough one. The thing that comes to mind has been, and I don't know if he was faithful, but I felt he was. I just had a brain tumor. And when I had to go to radiation, I always felt like God was with me. And I could always picture him holding my hand as I went into the room. And just, I don't know if that's faithful, I don't know. But I always just felt like he was there with me, never gonna leave me, was just gonna be there.
Yeah.
And consequently, I never worried about it. I mean, if it was cancer, it was cancer. If it wasn't, it wasn't.
Yeah. I think when people talk to Christians and they hear them going through medical things, which you have had your fair share of medical events, to see how people that trust in God handle that differently. You know, we talk about like, oh, we watched their life and how they handled it differently. But I think part of it, after watching some of my family go through it now, to see how at peace somebody is with it, and to experience that peace that comes from people praying for you, that comes from really a true reliance in God. It's kind of hard to explain that to somebody until they experience it themselves.
Right.
But do you know what I'm talking about? That, like, peace.
Yes, because the day I got the news that I had this tumor, I was having coffee with Gail. And I got a phone call, and I took it outside, and they told me what was going on, and I walked in, because I can panic. I mean, oh my gosh. And I walked in, and she said, is everything? And I said, I have a brain tumor. And she said, oh, yeah, right. Okay. So then I drove home, and I called my sister, and I said, Terry, I have something to tell you. And she said, what? I said, I have a brain tumor. She said, oh, yeah, right. nobody believed me, but there was just almost a peace. And like I say, if they told me this type of tumor was almost always benign. But, almost always isn't always.
Right.
So it just went through me that, it could be cancer.
Yeah.
Or it could not. I mean, God was in control. That's all I could do was think of, He was in control. Whatever was going to happen, and He was going to see me through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And well, at that point, I don't think anybody was praying because nobody knew about it. But I don't know what it is. There was just kind of a peace.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons we're doing these videos is so that maybe some of our young people will get to know some of our I'm going through the TNT group, and because y'all are so much fun and y'all are also so willing to do this with me, but you have these years of experience and you have these stories, right? And my hope is that something that you say in this video will also spark one of them to maybe something they relate to, or maybe something they're curious about, and then they get to talk to you. And then they hear more of your story, because we're 11 minutes in and I know Miss Peggy and she could be here. I told her my battery runs out at about 2 hours.
And I can be here for 2 hours.
And she could be here for 2 hours. And so there's tons of stories, but I want it to spark an interest in somebody seeing it and talking to you.
Right.
And then the more you talk to somebody else, I don't know if you've been there, but you suddenly have, oh my goodness, I do have some advice, or I have a verse that helped me through this. Was there ever any verses or anything like that stuck with you?
The thing is, no, because I was not raised with the Bible. I knew nothing. Really, I knew little snippets of the church I went to had like a verse each Sunday out of the Bible. And that was it. That was my only experience with the Bible. And so, as I learned it, no, I didn't have any to hold on to tell you the truth.
Interesting. Yeah. Was that, so not having those verses ingrained, was it hard when you came to somewhere like Crossway where biblical teaching is so much a part of what we do? Like, was that a hard transition or was it refreshing? What was that like?
When I came, I said to my son, I can't ever be baptized. And he said, why? And I said, these people all know, Mark 3:24. And Mark. And I said, I don't. He said, Mom, it's not a graduation.
Did you have to give a speech at your baptism?
No. I could have talked for an hour, but it never, and that made sense. It's not a graduation. You just keep learning and learning and learning. And even now, I feel like I hardly know. I do know, and maybe I shouldn't say this, I know one verse in the Bible by heart, and it's James 1:19. Slow to speak, slow to anger, quick to listen, whatever. And the reason I remembered it is because I love James, and my address was 119.
There you go.
So,
whatever works.
Exactly.
I was about to say, what do you mean slow to speak? We don't have any problems with that here, do we?
Let me tell you.
Oh. Okay, so this is also a question you can think on for a second. I didn't prep Peggy for any of this. If you could go back, this is one of those big questions. If you could go back and you were talking to young Peggy who was coming to Crossway and was like, not for me, I'm not doing it, and you said not a nice person, like if you were to try to convince her of what you know now, what was something that you would tell young Peggy?
Oh, heavens.
I know, that's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
Or what would you show her?
I don't know. That's a hard question. I do think, and this is going to sound silly, life is easier. I've found, and I don't know if it's age or what, I have more of a I don't worry about things as much as I used to. And a lot of it I can say is God's in control. And the other part of it is, when people bug me or something, I can say, don't look at them from a worldly view anymore. And that helps.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know what else I would say.
Yeah. And when you say God is in control, I that's such an interesting thing when I talk to people that don't believe the same things I do. And I'm like, well, I know God is in control.
Right.
And they're like, well, how do you know? And that's a hard one for me to answer. And normally it goes back to that piece for me.
Right.
But if somebody said, how do you know he's in control?
How do you know? That's my best friend lives in California. We've been friends for 50 years. And when I called her and told her I had the brain tumor, she said, oh yeah, like everybody else. And she said, but you're so calm. I said, Pat, God's in control, and whatever happens is going to happen. So I was talking to her a few days later, and she said, I told my niece what you said, and we were all the same religion before. Mm-hmm. And she said, both of us said, I don't know if I'd have that much faith.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was faith or, I don't know. But I just knew who was in control. And I mean, there are times in your life where you would really like to control it, and by golly, you just can't.
No. He laughs at that, doesn't he?
Uh-huh. For sure.
I do think that is one of the cool things about knowing the Bible, and I personally love the Old Testament. I know not everybody loves it, especially like I love it, but the stories, like in Joshua, where if you truly believe what the Bible says, well, I know my God is in control, right, because I can see how he had a plan for the Israelites, and nothing was going to stop that plan,
right,
and nothing was going to stop his control. Not people, not natural elements such as a river, right, or a sea or whatever it was, or bringing somebody back from the dead. None of that was out of his control.
Right.
So sometimes I tell myself, like, who are you to think that you have a problem that's big enough or something?
Yes.
You are not that important.
Exactly.
And I fall back a lot on those stories. Was there anybody that when you were, young in the faith or young in believing in God, that you were like, man, I love their faith, like some people have loved your faith?
Yes. I don't know. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody. I can't, usually really remembering God's in control is when you're in a situation that's hard. Mm-hmm. Because like now, I mean, I know God's in control right now, but I don't think about it. But when you have a biggie come along and you can rest on God's in control, it just, I don't know, that to me, I shouldn't be like that, because it's kind of like, when something's wrong, I pray harder.
Yeah.
No.
When
something's wrong, I have more faith. No. And I know God's in control. Well, now I have to remind myself every day, you know what? God's in control. Go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is easier when there's big things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very honest. I mean, we do. We pray more.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
You hit your knees hard during those big things.
Mm-hmm.
And then they resolve, and we kind of go back to...
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, is there anything else, as far as you kind of have a gist now that we've been talking through it, that you find encouraging, maybe that somebody told to you, or that you tell young people? Which Miss Peggy is going to be very humble about it, but she has always been a very good mentor to myself, to other young ladies in the church. She's very honest and real about things, and I think that draws us to you. And but if there was anything that you would say encouraging to young girls or young boys, of course, or really anybody in the church, of like, okay, so here's what I've learned in How many years have you been?
Since 2001,
Okay, so
23 years.
23 years. That's a good number of years.
Yes.
Any encouragement that you would love to part on
Oh, gosh.
besides get an animal therapy dog?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
I don't, you just have to, young girls are tempted with a lot more things than us older girls are. And you just have, I think it might be easier if you just remember that God's in control,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the temptations and all. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know how I'd behave if I were a disciple as a teenager.
Yeah,
And that has to be hard.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thank you for letting me video you.
Anytime.
I appreciate it.
No